Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth installment of my Japanese film series. Sorry if you hear a lot of traffic outside. The window's open because it's like 90 degrees in Boston today. But on this very hot day I thought I would talk about Mizoguchi Kenji's 1955 film SHIN, HEIKE, MONOGATARI. This film has been subtitled and released in the United States under the name Taira Clan Saga. If you are familiar with Japanese history, you'll know Heike and Taira are essentially the same name, or two different names for the same clan of samurai from the 12th century. And as you can see also, I'm kind of alternating between newer Japanese films and older Japanese films, just because I want to sort of mix it up a little bit and not, you know, only talk about the same thing over and over again. In any case, SHIN, HEIKE, MONOGATARI is not as famous as some of Mizoguchi Kenji's other works. You probably recognize other movies from him like Sansho the Bailiff, Uegetsu Monogatari, or Sisters of Gion. And this also is a unique film from him because it's one of his first films that he shot using color. And you can definitely tell this. There are some really lavish sets, some very beautiful costumes, and it's really flooding with color. And this film actually also had a really big production budget, so even though it's from 1955, it's really held up well over time. And this film really looks like it could have come from the 1960s or the 1970s. The story is based off a novel by Ishikawa Eiji. People might know his novels Musashi, about Miyamoto Musashi, or Taiko, about Toyotomi Hideyoshi. He's sort of a very romantic historical novelist from Japan. And this film is a classic post-war Japanese film. Earlier I talked about Akira Kurosawa's Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail. Now if that film from 1945 glorified feudalism, then SHIN, HEIKE, MONOGATARI is exactly the opposite. It is really post-war, really stresses things like individuality and democracy. And so you can see why it was probably popular during the 1950s. So the story basically is a retelling of a very famous historical time from about the 12th century, 1130s, and it's about a power struggle between three main groups. You have the court nobles, you have the priests or Buddhist monks, and of course you have the samurai. However, samurai from the 12th century are not how we would think of them from perhaps later eras like Tokugawa or 1600s or anything like that. They really have not established themselves as a firm social class, and they're not even the dominant social class. The court and even the priests saw them as sort of a necessary evil to keep wayward provinces and unruly monks in line. Samurai did not have the respect that they have in later years, because this is really the time where they earn that and where they take control. More specifically than just this general class struggle, SHIN, HEIKE, MONOGATARI follows the story of Taira no Kiyomori. He's very famous, and he figures largely in the medieval poem/story Heike Monogatari. And Taira no Kiyomori is the son of a samurai, but he soon finds out that his real father, the father he grew up with, is actually not really his. His mother was once a very famous prostitute in Gion, and so that means he could either be the son of the emperor or the son of a fallen corrupt monk. He doesn't know. And the story that results from this discovery is basically an angst-ridden quest for him to figure out who his true father is, what his lineage is. And it's also sort of a struggle for him to overthrow the existing power in Japan and sort of build a new power center that is less corrupt and less authoritarian. So again, you have that post-World War II theme. The three power groups that I mentioned before, they all represent something. And basically, you have the samurai, who represent individuality, integrity, strength, both physical and moral strength, pitted against the court, which represents authority and corruption, as well as priests, which represent sort of the degradation of institutionalized religion into factionalism, and also fascist sort of gang warfare. So you basically have very democratic ideals represented by the samurai, pitted against very undemocratic, elitist ideas. Again, very heavy with the post-war imagery here. And you also see that reflected in some of the prevalent themes. You have the democratic versus anti-democratic forces. You also have the theme of class. The samurai here, ironically, are depicted sort of as the repressed underdog class, you know, and they've basically been disrespected and treated like servants of the more elitist class, like the court nobles or the monks. And then you also have authoritarian injustice as another main theme, and obviously with the whole father lineage thing, you have the burden of family lineage. Just one last thing I'd like to point out. If you're familiar with the story Heike Monogatari, or you're familiar with any of the stories that talk about Minamoto no Yoshitsune, who's another famous samurai from this time, you'd be really surprised in SHIN HEIKE Monogatari that Kiyomori is actually the hero. He's presented as an individual, very virtuous, moral, he knows what's right, and he's also willing to break with tradition and superstition, which is represented in this great scene where some very angry monks are trying to forcefully get some land granted to them, and they've brought out their little portable shrine, and Kiyomori has none of it, and he pulls back an arrow and shoots it at the shrine, and his eyeballs don't melt out of his face. He's not struck down by lightning, so he's really an individual who's not afraid to go against tradition. And this sort of heroic representation of Kiyomori is very different from things found in other depictions of this time, or even Heike Monogatari itself. Typically, Kiyomori is depicted as a villain, and he's depicted as very corrupt. And his decline and the fall of the whole Taira clan is supposed to be a sort of allegory to the decay of Japanese society that was perceived at the time. And he's also vilified because he did not get along with the Minamoto family, and everyone in Japan loves Yoshitsune. And he definitely went against Yoshitsune and outlawed him and even tried to hunt him down. So Kiyomori is typically the villain, so it's kind of refreshing to see him in SHIN HEIKE Monogatari as the hero. And at the end of the film, Kiyomori is of course successful, and it's the rise of the Taira clan. And his victory is definitely supposed to be one of individualism and democratic ideals against elitism and corruption. Need I say it again? Post-war Japanese imagery, the triumph of democracy, the triumph of the individual. So this is a really interesting film from the 1950s. I highly recommend it if you're interested in seeing sort of post-war Japanese cinema or comparing it to World War II Japanese cinema. Is it one of the best of Mizoguchi Kenji's works? Maybe not. He certainly never really got a hold of the use of color in the same way Akira Kurosawa did. He doesn't really use color as well as he perhaps uses just black and white in his black and white films. But overall, it's definitely very interesting, especially if you're a fan of samurai films. So that's all I have to say for that. Thank you so much for commenting or rating or subscribing. It means a lot to me, and tune in for next time.